Picture a man who controls the underground of Chicago with an iron fist. A man whose mere gaze makes hardened criminals drop to their knees and pray. Now picture a 5'2" waitress with flour on her apron, raising her trembling hand and slapping that exact same man across his impeccably shaven jaw over a $3 dark roast. Sounds like an absolute death sentence. Right, keep listening, because what happened next, between the city's most terrifying syndicate boss and a desperately broke college student, defies every rule of survival power and obsession. Rain lashed against the grimy neon-lit windows of Miller's Corner Diner, a forgotten establishment, tucked away beneath the rumbling tracks of the Chicago L train. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burnt hash browns, stale grease, and exhaustion. Chloe Jenkins wiped down booth 4 for the third time, her hands raw from cheap industrial bleach. At 22, Chloe carried the weight of a world much older. Between her younger sister, Lily's mounting bills at Rush University Medical Center, and the crushing weight of their late father's bad decisions, Chloe was surviving on 4 hours of sleep and sheer stubborn willpower. The bell above the diner door didn't just chime. It violently clanged, announcing a shift in the atmosphere so sudden it felt like the air pressure in the room had dropped. 4 men walked in. The first 3 were massive, built like brick walls, wearing tailored dark suits that bulged slightly at the chest and waist, a clear indicator of concealed weaponry. But it was the 4th man who made the diner fall dead silent. Roman Gallagher. Even a girl working double shifts in a rundown diner knew who he was. Roman wasn't just a mobster. He was the undisputed king of the city's underbelly. At 32, he possessed a chilling, predatory grace. He wore a custom charcoal Brioni suit that probably cost more than the diner itself, and an icy, dead-eyed expression that promised violence to anyone foolish enough to hold his gaze. His dark hair was perfectly swept back, and on his left wrist rested a Patek Philippe Nautilus that caught the dim fluorescent light. The few late-night patrons in the diner abruptly stopped eating. A man in a booth near the door quietly slid out, left a 20 on the table, and scurried into the rain without looking back. Mr. Henderson, the diner's manager, audibly gasped from behind the cash register, dropping a stack of paper napkins. Roman ignored them all. He moved with silent authority to the center booth Chloe's section and slid into the cracked red vinyl seat. His men flanked the booth, standing like statues. Chloe's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her legs felt like lead, but the unwritten rule of the service industry pushed her forward. Take the order, no matter who it is. She grabbed her notepad, her hands shaking slightly, and approached the table. "What can I get you?" Chloe asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Roman didn't even look at her. He was staring out the window at the rain, his jaw tight. "Black coffee," he murmured. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated straight through her chest. "Make it fast." Chloe nodded quickly and hurried to the counter. She poured the freshest dark roast they had into a thick ceramic mug, her hands trembling so much that a few drops spilled onto the saucer. She wiped it clean and carried it back to his table. "Your coffee," she said softly, placing it before him. Roman finally shifted his gaze to her. His eyes were a piercing, cold steel blue, devoid of any warmth or empathy. He looked at her not as a person, but as an object taking up space in his peripheral vision. He lifted the mug, took one sip, and set it back down with a sharp clack. "Stale," he muttered, standing up. He buttoned his suit jacket, preparing to leave. He hadn't been in the diner for more than 3 minutes. He was leaving, and he wasn't leaving a dime. For 99.9% of the population, a terrifying Mafia boss walking out without paying for a $3 coffee is a blessing. It means you survived. It means he is gone. But for Chloe, exhaustion and a crushing sense of injustice bypassed her survival instincts. She was already short on her rent, already dealing with men taking advantage of her, and this arrogant billionaire mobster wasn't about to stiff her on a bill that Mr. Henderson would undoubtedly deduct from her meager paycheck. "Excuse me," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the silent diner. Roman's men stiffened. The man closest to Chloe, a towering giant with a scarred eyebrow named Declan, narrowed his eyes. Roman paused, turning slowly. He looked down at her, amused but mostly annoyed. "Did you speak to me?" "You owe $3.24, Chloe said, pointing at the steaming mug. "With tax." Roman stared at her, genuinely baffled. "I didn't drink it. You ordered it. You tasted it. You pay for it." Chloe's chin tilted up. She was 5'2", standing in scuffed, non-slip shoes, demanding money from a man who had allegedly thrown a rival gang leader off the roof of the Willis Tower. "Let it go, kid," Declan warned, softly taking a step toward her. Roman held up a hand, silencing his bodyguard. He leaned down, bringing his face dangerously close to Chloe's. She could smell his cologne, something expensive, mixing cedarwood and bergamot. "Do you know who I am, little girl?" Roman whispered, his voice laced with a lethal edge. "I don't care if you're the mayor of Chicago or the Pope." Chloe snapped back, the exhaustion finally overriding her fear. "I work 14 hours a day. If my register is short, my boss takes it out of my tips. I need that money. So pay for your coffee." Roman scoffed a dark, humorless sound. He turned his back to her to walk away. It happened in a fraction of a second. Chloe's hand shot out. She grabbed his incredibly expensive suit sleeve to stop him. Roman whipped around, his reflexes born of the violent streets. He ripped his arm away, glaring at her with such intense, murderous fury that Chloe snapped. It was a reflex action, built on months of stress, lack of sleep, and sheer desperation. Smack! The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Chloe's palm connected squarely with Roman Gallagher's cheek. The force of it threw his head slightly to the side. Total suffocating silence descended on Miller's Corner diner. Declan's hand instantly went inside his jacket, wrapping around the grip of his firearm. Mr. Henderson let out a strangled squeak and ducked behind the counter. Chloe froze. The stinging in her hand finally registered in her brain. Oh my God, she thought, the blood draining from her face. "I just hit him. I just hit Roman Gallagher." Roman stood perfectly still. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head back to face her. The skin on his left cheek was already turning a faint shade of pink. His steel blue eyes were wide, not with anger, but with absolute, unadulterated shock. No one had laid a hand on him in 15 years. No one. He stared at this tiny, trembling girl. She looked like she was about to pass out. Her chest heaved, her big brown eyes filled with sudden terror, yet she didn't step back. She held her ground. Roman raised his hand. Chloe flinched, bracing for the backhand that would likely break her jaw. Instead, Roman reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out a sleek, black leather money clip, detached a crisp $100 bill, and let it flutter onto the table next to the coffee. He didn't say a word. He didn't threaten her. He simply turned and walked out the door into the Chicago rain. His men, equally stunned, hurried after him. Chloe collapsed into booth 4, trembling violently, staring at the $100 bill as if it were a ticking bomb. For 2 agonizing days, Chloe lived in a state of hypervigilance. Every time a car drove slowly past her crumbling apartment building in Pilsen, she expected the door to be kicked in. Every time the diner's bell chimed, she flinched, expecting Roman's thugs to drag her into an alley. Mr. Henderson had nearly fired her on the spot after the incident. "Are you out of your mind?" he had shrieked, pulling at his thinning hair. He's going to burn this place to the ground, and us with it." But no fire came. No bullets shattered the windows. Instead, on Thursday night, the bell chimed. Chloe, carrying a tray of dirty dishes, froze. It wasn't Roman. It was Declan the giant with the scarred eyebrow. He walked in alone, wearing a casual leather jacket over a black t-shirt. He didn't look angry. He looked amused. He sat in booth 4. Chloe swallowed the lump of terror in her throat, handed her tray to another waitress, and walked over. "What can I get you?" she asked, staring at the table. "Black coffee and a slice of cherry pie," Declan said smoothly. He looked up at her, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "And don't worry, kid. I'm paying." Chloe quickly brought his order. Declan ate the pie in silence, drank the coffee, and left. When Chloe went to clear the table, she found a $50 bill tucked under the saucer. The next night, Declan returned. Same order. Same massive tip. By Saturday, Chloe was losing her mind. This was psychological warfare. They were reminding her they knew where she was. They were playing with their food before the kill. Then came Sunday evening. The rain had returned, turning the city streets into slick black mirrors. The diner was empty, except for an old man reading a newspaper in the corner. The door opened. Roman Gallagher walked in. Chloe dropped a handful of silverware into the plastic tub with a loud clatter. Her heart leapt into her throat. He was dressed slightly more casually tonight, a black cashmere turtleneck under a tailored dark grey overcoat. The bruise from her slap had faded, but the memory hung heavily in the air between them. He walked directly to booth 4 and sat down. He didn't look at a menu. He just looked at her. Chloe took a deep breath, wiped her sweaty palms on her apron, and walked over. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Yes," Roman said. His gaze was intense, tracing the dark circles under her eyes, the fraying edges of her uniform, the exhausted slump of her shoulders. "And a club sandwich." She nodded and retreated to the kitchen. When she returned with his food, she set it down carefully, making sure not to spill a drop. "Your change from the other night," Chloe said suddenly. She pulled a crumpled envelope from her apron pocket and placed it on the table. Inside was $96.76. "You gave me $100. The coffee was $3.24. I don't want your charity." Roman looked at the envelope, then back up at her. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in his icy blue eyes. It wasn't anger. It was deep, profound curiosity. In Roman's world, everyone wanted something from him. Money, power, protection, or mercy. People kissed the ground he walked on, laughing at his jokes, agreeing with his every word out of sheer terror. But this girl, this exhausted, overworked waitress living below the poverty line, had slapped him over $3 and was now returning $96 of perfectly good cash just to maintain her pride. "Keep it." Roman said, his voice a low rumble. "I don't want it," Chloe insisted. "I don't take loose change, Chloe." She froze. He knew her name. She didn't wear a name tag. Seeing her panic, Roman picked up the coffee mug. "My associate Declan is very thorough. He told me about you. Chloe Jenkins. 22. Dropped out of Northwestern University in your sophomore year. You live in a 2-bedroom walk-up in Pilsen with your sister Lily, who suffers from severe chronic asthma. Your father, Richard Jenkins, died of a heart attack 6 months ago, leaving you with absolutely nothing except a mountain of debt." Chloe felt sick. The walls of the diner seemed to close in on her. "Why are you looking into me? Are you going to kill me over a slap?" Roman actually chuckled a dark, low sound that sent shivers down her spine. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have woken up on Wednesday morning. No, I'm not going to hurt you." Then what do you want? Roman leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He looked at her with a predatory intensity that made her breath hitch. I want to understand how a girl who is drowning in debt, working herself to the bone, has the audacity to strike a man who could erase her existence with a single phone call. I was tired, Chloe whispered, suddenly feeling very small. And I was angry. You were fearless, Roman corrected softly. Or incredibly stupid. I haven't decided which yet. He stood up, tossing another $100 bill onto the table next to her envelope. I'll be back, Chloe. Keep making the coffee. As he walked out, Chloe realized with a terrifying certainty that slapping Roman Gallagher hadn't gotten her killed. It had done something much, much worse. It had caught his attention. Life, however, did not care about Chloe's newfound mobster stalker. Life only cared about deadlines, and Chloe was brutally out of time. Her father, Richard, hadn't just been bad with money. He had been a degenerate gambler. Before his heart gave out, he had borrowed heavily from the wrong kind of people to fund his poker habits. Specifically, he had borrowed from Tommy Razor Flynn, a mid-level enforcer for a South Side crew known for running loan shark operations and illegal gambling dens. On Tuesday night, after a grueling 12-hour shift, Chloe walked out the back door of the diner into the alley to toss the trash. The air was frigid, the scent of garbage and wet pavement overwhelming. As she tossed the heavy black bag into the dumpster, a rough hand suddenly clamped onto her shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her against the brick wall. The breath was knocked out of her. Chloe gasped, looking up into the scarred, pock-marked face of Tommy Flynn. Two of his goons stood behind him, blocking the exit to the street. "Hello, little bird." Tommy sneered, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey and cigarettes. "Your old man's tab is past due. I told you." Chloe choked out, struggling against his grip. "I'm making payments. I sent you $400 last week." $400. Tommy laughed, a nasty grating sound. He pressed his forearm against her collarbone, pinning her harder against the brick. "The vig on 15 grand is a hell of a lot more than 400, sweetheart. You're barely covering the interest. My boss is losing patience, so we're gonna change the arrangement." "I don't have the money," Chloe cried out, her hands pushing uselessly against his chest. "Well, you have other assets," Tommy said, his eyes raking over her body in a way that made Chloe's skin crawl. "We run a couple of private clubs. You come work for me for a year, entertain some of our high-paying clients, and we'll call the debt square." "No," Chloe spat, terror giving way to disgust. "I'm not doing that. Let me go." Tommy's face darkened. He raised a heavy hand, ready to backhand her across the face to teach her a lesson. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Tommy." The voice was cold, calm, and echoed through the damp alley like a death knell. Tommy froze, his hand still raised in the air. He slowly turned his head. A sleek, black Cadillac Escalade had rolled silently to the end of the alley. The headlights were off. Standing in the shadows, leaning casually against the brick wall, was Roman Gallagher. Declan stood a few feet away, his arms crossed over his massive chest. Tommy let go of Chloe instantly, taking a panicked step back. His arrogant swagger evaporated, replaced by genuine trembling fear. "Mr. Gallagher, I didn't know you were in this neighborhood." Chloe slumped against the wall, gasping for air, clutching her collarbone. She stared at Roman. In the dim light of the alley, he looked like a grim reaper draped in a black overcoat. Roman slowly walked forward. His dress shoes clicked rhythmically against the wet pavement. He didn't look at Tommy's goons, who had practically pressed themselves against the dumpsters to get out of his way. He stopped just 3 feet from Tommy. "What are you doing to my waitress, Tommy?" Roman asked softly. Tommy swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cold. "Your waitress, mister. Gallagher, I swear, I didn't know she belonged to you. Her old man Richard, he owed my crew 15 large. I was just collecting." "You a man handling a woman over $15,000, Roman stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek black leather checkbook. He unscrewed a silver Mont Blanc pen, quickly scrawled a number, signed it, and ripped the check out. He held it out to Tommy. "Here is $30,000, Roman said. 15 for the debt. 15 for the trouble of never speaking to, looking at, or thinking about Chloe Jenkins ever again." Tommy hesitated, his hands shaking as he took the check. "Mr. Gallagher, you don't have to do this." "My boss?" "If your boss has a problem with it," Roman interrupted, taking a step closer, his height and presence dwarfing the street thug. "Tell him he can come see me at the Obsidian Lounge. We can discuss it, over coffee." The underlying threat was crystal clear. Roman's syndicate could wipe Tommy's crew off the map before sunrise. "No, sir. No problem at all," Tommy stammered. He shoved the check into his pocket. "We're good. Debt is settled. Let's go, boys." Tommy and his men practically sprinted out of the alley, disappearing into the Chicago night. Silence descended on the alley, broken only by the sound of dripping water from the fire escapes. Chloe stood trembling against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself. Roman turned to her. The cold, murderous aura he had directed at Tommy faded, slightly replaced by that same intense, calculating observation. He stepped closer, reaching out. Chloe flinched slightly, but he only gently brushed a stray lock of wet hair out of her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "No." Chloe breathed, her heart pounding. "Why did you do that? Why did you pay him?" "I don't like people touching what is mine," Roman stated matter-of-factly. Chloe's head snapped up. "I'm not yours. I'm not anyone's property." Roman smirked. "You owed Tommy 15,000. Now you owe me 30. Chloe felt a new wave of panic wash over her. 30. I can't pay you $30,000. I make minimum wage." "I know," Roman said, turning to walk back toward his SUV. He paused and looked over his shoulder. "Which is why you're quitting this diner. Effective immediately. You work for me now." Chloe stared at him, bewildered. "Doing what I'm not doing anything illegal, and I'm certainly not." "You are going to be my personal assistant at the estate." Roman cut her off his tone, leaving no room for argument. "You will manage my schedule, organize my files, and ensure my coffee is never ever stale. You will be paid $5,000 a week, and you will have the best medical insurance in the state of Illinois to cover your sister's asthma treatments." Chloe's jaw dropped. 5,000 a week, full medical for Lily. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle, but it was attached to the most dangerous man in the city. "Why?" she whispered, the rain beginning to fall harder, soaking her uniform. "Why are you doing this for me?" Roman looked at her for a long, silent moment. The neon light from a distant sign reflected in his icy eyes. "Because, Chloe," Roman said softly, "in a world full of people who lie to my face every single day, you are the only person who has ever been completely, brutally honest with me. Be at the Obsidian Lounge tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late." He got into the back of the Escalade. Declan gave Chloe a curt nod before climbing into the driver's seat. The black SUV glided smoothly out of the alley, leaving Chloe alone in the rain, her entire world irrevocably changed. She had just traded one monster for another. But as she touched the spot on her collarbone, where Tommy had grabbed her, and realized she was finally safe from him, she couldn't help but wonder if the devil you know is better than the devil who pays your debts. Morning sunlight pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows of the obsidian lounge, a sprawling penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper on Lakeshore Drive. Chloe stepped out of the private elevator, her cheap, scuffed sneakers sinking into plush charcoal grey carpeting that probably cost more than her college tuition. Declan was already waiting for her, holding a tablet and looking completely out of place next to a delicate Murano glass chandelier. "You're early," the giant noted, checking his Rolex Submariner. "Boss likes that. Follow me." He led her through a labyrinth of modern minimalist corridors until they reached a massive set of double oak doors. Declan pushed them open, revealing an office that looked like it belonged to a Fortune 500 CEO, not a crime lord. Roman sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk, intensely reviewing a stack of documents. He wore a crisp-tailored Tom Ford dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing a map of intricate dark ink tattoos snaking up his right forearm. "Sit," Roman commanded without looking up. Chloe took the leather seat opposite him, her heart doing that familiar, erratic flutter. Roman finally dropped his pen, a heavy Mont Blanc Meisterstück, and leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Your sister's transfer to Northwestern Memorial Hospital has been arranged. Dr. Harrison, the top pulmonologist in the Midwest, is taking over her case this afternoon. All medical bills will be routed to my private accounts." Tears pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. She had spent the last 2 years fighting with insurance companies, begging for basic inhalers, and watching Lily struggle to breathe during the brutal Chicago winters. "I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Roman said, his voice devoid of warmth. "You haven't earned it. Declan will show you to your desk. You will review the shipping manifests for my logistics company, Apex Harbor Freight. I want a summary of every discrepancy from the last quarter on my desk by 5 o'clock. Chloe nodded, eager to prove she wasn't just a charity case. "I can do that." For the next 3 weeks, Chloe's life transformed into a surreal paradox. She moved her and Lily out of their crumbling Pilsen apartment and into a secure luxury 2-bedroom condo in the Gold Coast, fully paid for by Roman. She traded her greasy diner apron for sleek pencil skirts and silk blouses funded by a corporate allowance Roman insisted she use. But the real shock was the work. Roman Gallagher wasn't just breaking kneecaps in back alleys. He was running a massive, highly sophisticated empire. He owned real estate shipping lines and construction firms. The illegal activities, extortion, gambling, and smuggling were carefully washed through these legitimate fronts, and Chloe, brilliant but impoverished, found herself perfectly suited for the chaos. Her brain wired by years of hypervigilance and penny-pinching spotted anomalies that Roman's overpaid accountants missed. On a rainy Tuesday late in the evening, Chloe sat alone in the dim office, her eyes burning as she stared at the screen. She was cross-referencing Apex Harbor Freight's dock fees with their fuel consumption. Something was wrong. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Roman walked in, holding 2 steaming ceramic mugs. The scent of a perfectly brewed Ethiopian dark roast filled the air. "You're still here," Roman observed, walking over and placing a mug on her desk. "You're paying me $5,000 a week," Chloe replied, accepting the coffee. "I figured I should earn it." Roman pulled up a chair beside her, dangerously close. The scent of cedarwood and bergamot wrapped around her, making her pulse race. "What did you find a bleed?" Chloe said, pointing at the screen. "Look at these 3 cargo ships, the Iron Queen, the Tidal Wave, and the Northern Star. They log fuel for trips to Montreal, but their dock times in Chicago show they're sitting idle for an extra 48 hours every month. Someone is falsifying the logs and skimming the fuel budget. But it's more than that." Roman's eyes narrowed, staring at the numbers. "Go on. The maintenance fees for those 48 hours are being billed to a shell company in Delaware called V Corp Holdings," Chloe explained. I traced the registered agent. It points back to a man named Vincent Moretti. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Roman went completely still, his jaw tightening so hard, a muscle twitched near his ear. Vincent Moretti was the head of the Italian syndicate on the West Side. He was Roman's oldest rival and a man known for his sadistic unpredictability. Someone inside my logistics company is facilitating shipments for Moretti under my nose, Roman said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. And using my money to cover the docking fees. Yes, Chloe whispered, suddenly terrified by the dark, violent shadow passing over Roman's face. Roman turned his head, looking at her. The proximity was intoxicating. His steel-blue eyes searched hers, shedding the icy exterior for just a fraction of a second. Do you know what you just did, Chloe? I did my job. You just saved me millions, Roman corrected softly. And you likely just signed a death warrant for whoever signed off on these manifests. Chloe swallowed hard. Who signed off on them? Roman stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the office. My cousin, Damian Gallagher. Before Chloe could process the sheer magnitude of a Mafia family betrayal, Roman reached down his knuckles, lightly brushing against her cheek. The touch was impossibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence swirling in his eyes. Go home, Chloe, Roman ordered, turning away. Lock your doors. Declan will drive you. Do not leave your apartment tomorrow. 4 days passed in agonizing silence. Chloe stayed locked in her Gold Coast condo, playing board games with Lily, whose breathing was remarkably clear thanks to the new medications. Every time Chloe's phone buzzed, she jumped. But Roman didn't call. When the news broke on Friday morning, it was on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. Local shipping executive Damian Gallagher found dead in apparent boating accident. Chloe stared at the newspaper on her marble kitchen counter, her stomach violently churning. It wasn't an accident. She knew it. Roman knew it. She had handed Roman the ledger, and Roman had handed down the execution. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. She was no longer just an observer in this violent world. She was an active participant. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, 8 p.m. Wear something nice. At 7:45. PM Declan picked her up in the black Escalade. Chloe wore a sleek, forest green silk dress she had bought with her corporate card, her dark hair cascading in soft waves. She felt like an imposter, playing dress-up-a-lamb, walking willingly into the lion's den. Gibson's was packed with Chicago's elite, smelling of seared ribeye and expensive cigars. Roman was waiting in a private, dimly lit booth in the back. He looked devastatingly handsome in a navy blue suit, a glass of Macallan 25 resting in his hand. When he saw her, his eyes darkened, traveling slowly from the hem of her dress to her face. He stood up, pulling out her chair. You look breathtaking, Roman murmured, taking his seat across from her. Chloe couldn't return the compliment. She felt sick. Damian is dead. Roman took a slow sip of his scotch. Damian was a traitor. He was feeding our shipping routes to Moretti and plotting to have me removed. In my world, treason has only one cure. But he was your family, Chloe whispered, her hands shaking as she grabbed her water glass. Family is a biological accident, Roman said coldly. Loyalty is a choice. You showed me loyalty, Chloe. You proved that the fiery little waitress who slapped me over $3 has more integrity than men I've known my entire life. He reached across the white tablecloth, his large, scarred hand covering her trembling petite one. His skin was warm. I brought you here because things are going to get dangerous. Moretti knows I found the leak. He knows I killed Damian. He will retaliate. Then why am I here? Chloe asked, genuinely terrified. Why didn't you just leave me at the condo? Because, Roman said, his voice dropping an octave filled with a raw, dangerous possessiveness. I needed to see you. I needed to know you were okay. Chloe's breath hitched. The cruel, untouchable Mafia boss was looking at her like she was the only oxygen left in the room. The tension between them was electric heavy with unspoken desire and the metallic tang of impending violence. Roman, she started, but the words died in her throat. Crash. The front window of the restaurant shattered into a million glittering pieces. Screams erupted through the dining room. Chloe didn't even have time to register the sound of the gunfire before Roman was moving. He vaulted across the table, knocking her out of her chair and pinning her to the floor beneath his massive weight, just as a spray of bullets tore through the leather upholstery of their booth. "Stay down!" Roman roared over the deafening pop, pop, pop of automatic weapons. Glass rained down on them. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, clapping her hands over her ears, a scream tearing from her throat. She could feel Roman's heart hammering against her back, his body acting as a human shield. Declan, who had been sitting at a table near the entrance, was already returning fire, his heavy Glock booming through the chaos. Two men in dark masks were firing submachine guns from the street, aiming specifically at the back booth. Roman pulled a customized 1911 pistol from his shoulder holster. "Declan, cover the flank." Roman grabbed Chloe by the waist and dragged her roughly behind the thick, solid oak bar. Bottles of premium liquor exploded above them, raining bourbon and vodka over their clothes. "Look at me," Roman demanded, grabbing her face with his free hand. His eyes were wild, fully engulfed in the predator mindset. "Are you hit?" No. Chloe sobbed, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "I'm okay." Roman's expression hardened into pure, unadulterated rage. "Stay right here. Do not move." Before she could stop him, Roman surged out from behind the bar. He didn't cower. He didn't run. He walked straight into the line of fire with terrifying, methodical precision. Chloe watched through the gaps in the bar stools as Roman raised his pistol. Bang! Bang! 2 shots. The first masked shooter on the street dropped instantly, his weapon clattering onto the pavement. The second shooter panicked, turning to run. Roman tracked him smoothly. Bang! The man pitched forward, crashing through a parked car's windshield. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the sudden ringing silence of the restaurant. Patrons were sobbing under tables. Declan was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, but he kicked the weapons away from the downed men. Roman lowered his gun, his chest heaving. He turned back, his cold eyes searching the wreckage until they locked onto Chloe, huddled behind the bar. He walked over his expensive suit, ruined, smelling of gunpowder and spilled alcohol. He holstered his weapon and reached down, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Chloe buried her face in his neck, sobbing uncontrollably, her fingers digging into his jacket. "I've got you," Roman whispered fiercely against her hair, carrying her toward the back exit. "I've got you, and I swear to God, Vincent Moretti will burn in hell for this." As they stepped into the cold Chicago night air, surrounded by the flashing red and blue lights of arriving police cruisers, Chloe realized the absolute truth. She wasn't just working for a monster. She was falling in love with him. And that realization was more terrifying than any bullet. Rain turned to sleet, and sleet turned to a blinding snowstorm as the bullet-riddled black Escalade tore northward onto Interstate 94, leaving the neon-soaked skyline of Chicago far behind. Inside the heavy armored SUV, the silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic, frantic thumping of the windshield wipers and the heavy, ragged breathing of the men in the front seats. Chloe sat trembling in the expansive leather back seat, her forest green silk dress stained with her own tears, spilled bourbon, and a terrifying smear of another man's blood. Roman sat beside her, his custom Tom Ford suit jacket discarded on the floorboards. His pristine white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, completely ruined by the ash and debris of the Gibson's bar and steakhouse shootout. He was systematically reloading a spare magazine for his 1911 pistol, his massive scarred hands moving with terrifying mechanical precision. He didn't look like the polished billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms. He looked exactly like what the whispered street legends claimed. He was an apex predator. Declan. Roman's voice cut through the darkness, low and gravelly, laced with an absolute, uncompromising authority. Status. We lost the tail at the I-29. Oh, interchange, boss. Declan grunted from the driver's seat. The giant of a man had tightly bound his bleeding shoulder with a tactical tourniquet from the glove box, but his driving remained flawlessly aggressive. Moretti's hitters were local muscle, amateurs, but they knew exactly where you were sitting. Somebody sold out the reservation. Call the extraction team, Roman commanded, finally sliding the loaded magazine into his firearm with a sharp, metallic clack. I want a heavily armed perimeter set up at the Lake Geneva estate before we cross the Wisconsin border. Then I want you to dispatch the cleaner crew to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. They are to pull Lily out of the respiratory ward immediately. Use the Private Bell 429 helicopter. I want her in the air and heading to the safe house in 10 minutes. Chloe's head snapped up, a fresh wave of panic, violently seizing her chest at the mention of her little sister. Lily, why Lily? She doesn't have anything to do with this. Roman finally turned to look at her. The icy, untouchable exterior he usually wore was entirely gone, replaced by a raw, burning intensity that made Chloe's breath hitch. He reached across the wide seat, his large, warm hand gently gripping her chin, forcing her to hold his gaze. Vincent Moretti just declared a total, unmitigated war. Roman stated his voice, softening just a fraction, exclusively for her. He missed his shot at me tonight. In my world, when a rat misses the king, they immediately go after what the king protects. You are mine to protect now, Chloe. That means Lily is mine to protect too. I will burn this entire hemisphere to ashes before I let anyone lay a single finger on either of you. Do you understand me? Tears spilled over Chloe's eyelashes, tracking through the dust on her cheeks. She didn't feel trapped anymore. She felt an overwhelming, terrifying sense of belonging. Yes, she whispered. 3 agonizing hours later, the Escalade passed through massive wrought-iron gates, crunching over the fresh, deep snow of a sprawling, heavily forested property in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. The safe house wasn't a humble cabin. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern stone and glass fortress, tucked into a secluded cove completely invisible from the main roads. Heavily armed men in tactical winter gear patrolled the perimeter assault rifles slung across their chests, accompanied by massive Belgian Malinois guard dogs. As they stepped out into the freezing wind, the distinctive, deafening roar of helicopter rotors echoed over the lake. Chloe watched her heart leaping into her throat as a sleek, black chopper touched down on the snow-covered helipad near the docks. 2 medics rushed out, pushing a specialized transport gurney. Lily was bundled in thick, insulated blankets, an oxygen mask securely over her face. But she was awake, her wide, terrified eyes scanning the darkness, until she saw her sister. Lily! Chloe screamed, sprinting across the icy driveway, completely ignoring the freezing snow soaking through her thin designer dress. She practically collided with the gurney, throwing her arms around her sister's frail shoulders. Chloe, what's happening? Lily coughed, clutching Chloe's hand with desperate strength. Men in suits came into my room. They said Roman sent them. It's okay, baby, it's okay. Chloe sobbed, pressing her forehead against her sister's. We're safe. I promise you. We are completely safe." Roman walked up behind them, the heavy snowfall dusting his dark hair. He looked down at Lily, his harsh features softening into an expression Chloe had never seen before: genuine protective empathy. "Get her inside," Roman ordered the medics. "Put her in the master suite. Hook up the portable oxygen concentrators. If her vitals drop even 1 percentage point, I want to know about it." Once inside the cavernous, heavily fortified living room, the adrenaline that had been sustaining Chloe finally violently crashed. She stood near the massive stone fireplace, shivering uncontrollably as the heat began to permeate her frozen skin. Roman approached her carrying a heavy plush cashmere blanket. He wrapped it securely around her shoulders, pulling her close against his chest. He smelled of cordite expensive scotch and freezing rain. "You need to sleep," Roman murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. "I can't," Chloe confessed, her voice shaking violently. Her analytical brain, the very thing that had saved Roman millions, was spiraling out of control. "Roman, something doesn't make sense. You said Damien was the leak. You said he was the one selling the shipping routes. But Damien has been dead for 48 hours. How did Moretti know exactly what table we were sitting at tonight? How did he organize a hit that fast?" Roman's jaw tightened, a dangerous shadow passing over his eyes. "Damien had loyalists in my ranks. One of them is likely picking up where he left off." "No," Chloe insisted, pulling back slightly to look him in the eye. "It's too fast. And why target you at Gibson's? It's a public place, high risk. Unless they didn't know you were going to be there until the very last minute." "Roman, who made the reservation?" "Declan," Roman said, his voice turning to ice. "But Declan has been with me since we were teenagers, bleeding in the streets of the South Side. He took a bullet for me tonight. He wouldn't betray me." Chloe closed her eyes, forcing her mind to rewind to process the chaotic events of the last few days. "When you moved Lily to Northwestern Memorial, who handled the logistics?" Roman frowned, clearly confused by the pivot. "My medical fixer. He coordinates with the hospital administration to ensure anonymity." Chloe's eyes snapped open, a horrifying realization dawning on her. "Roman, where is your laptop? The one with the secure access to the Apex Harbor freight manifests." 10 minutes later, Chloe was sitting at the massive granite kitchen island, her fingers flying across the backlit keyboard of Roman's encrypted MacBook Pro. Roman and Declan stood directly behind her, watching the screen intensely. "Look," Chloe said, her voice tight with anxiety. She pulled up a complex spreadsheet, highlighting a series of transactions. "When I found the discrepancy with the Iron Queen and the Northern Star, I noticed the maintenance fees were paid to V Corp Holdings, Moretti's shell company. But I stopped digging after that. I assumed Damien was just skimming cash." "What did you miss?" Roman asked, leaning in close. "The cargo." Chloe breathed, bringing up the customs declarations. "Damien wasn't just skimming fuel money. He was letting Moretti use your ships to smuggle something highly specific. Look at the weight distribution and the listed contents. Industrial-grade pressurized containers. Moretti isn't moving drugs on your ships, Roman. He's moving medical-grade liquid oxygen and specialized respiratory equipment." Declan cursed violently under his breath. "Lily's new hospital room," Chloe said, her voice breaking as she looked up at Roman. "The new oxygen concentrators, the specialized tanks Dr. Harrison ordered for her. They were supplied by a company called Breathe Right Medical." She typed furiously, running a corporate trace on the supply company. The screen flashed, revealing the registered agent. Vincent Moretti. "He didn't track your phone, Roman," Chloe whispered, her blood running cold. "He tracked my sister. He put GPS trackers inside the medical equipment his shell company supplied to Northwestern. He knew exactly where Lily was, and when I went to the hospital to visit her this afternoon, before our dinner, his men pinged my location. They followed me back to the Gold Coast condo, watched me get into your car, and followed us to Gibson's. The silence in the room was absolute heavy, with the weight of impending catastrophic violence. Roman stared at the screen, his chest rising and falling with slow, calculated breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice was so devoid of humanity, it made Chloe shiver. "He used a sick girl to get to me," Roman whispered. He turned to Declan. "Arm everyone. Every single man on this property gets a long rifle. He tracked the equipment, which means he knows we brought it here. He's already on his way." Midnight descended upon the Lake Geneva estate like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The snowstorm had escalated into a total whiteout, howling against the reinforced, bulletproof glass windows of the fortress. Inside, the lights were entirely killed, plunging the house into darkness, illuminated only by the faint, flickering glow of the massive fireplace and the tactical flashlights of Roman's heavily armed guards pacing the corridors. Chloe sat on the floor of the master suite, her back pressed against the heavy oak door, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. Across the room, Lily was deeply asleep, sedated by the medical staff to keep her heart rate down, blissfully unaware of the absolute nightmare unfolding outside. In Chloe's trembling hands was a sleek, heavy, matte black Glock 19. Roman had pressed it into her palms just 20 minutes ago, his hands covering hers, teaching her how to disengage the safety. "You point it at the center of their chest and you keep pulling the trigger until the gun stops firing." Roman had instructed, his voice harsh, but his eyes filled with desperate affection. "Do not hesitate, Chloe. You are the strongest woman I have ever met. Protect your sister." Suddenly, the deafening silence was shattered by a massive, earth-shaking explosion. Chloe screamed, covering her ears, as the sheer concussive force rattled the heavy paintings on the bedroom walls. Moretti's men had breached the outer perimeter, likely using C4 on the reinforced steel gates. Gunfire immediately erupted, a chaotic, terrifying symphony of automatic weapons tearing through the howling wind. It sounded like a war zone. Chloe could hear the deep, booming reports of Declan's shotgun echoing from the grand staircase, followed by the frantic shouting of men bleeding out in the snow. For 20 agonizing minutes, Chloe sat in the dark, her finger resting dangerously close to the trigger, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to since her father died. The gunfire grew closer, echoing violently through the lower halls of the mansion. Roman's men were fighting fiercely, but Moretti had brought a small army, heavily funded, and desperate for the king's crown. Then she heard it. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching the master suite door. Chloe's heart stopped. She scrambled to her feet, raising the heavy pistol with both hands, aiming it squarely at the center of the heavy oak door. Her breath came in short, terrified gasps. "Roman," she whimpered, hoping against hope. The doorknob slowly turned. It was locked. Then a voice slithered through the heavy wood, dripping with sadistic amusement. "Hello, little bird. I hear you're the one who found my ledger." It wasn't Roman. It was Vincent Moretti. "Go away," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with terror. "I'm armed!" Moretti laughed, a dark, raspy sound. "A waitress with a gun. How terrifying! Step away from the door, sweetheart. I just want to leave Roman a message he'll never forget." Bam! 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 Moretti fired 3 shots from a heavy-caliber revolver directly into the lock. The wood splintered violently, raining sharp debris across the carpet. Chloe screamed and stumbled backward, maintaining her grip on the gun, positioning herself directly in front of Lily's bed. The door violently kicked open. Vincent Moretti stepped into the room. He was older than Roman, with slicked-back graying hair, a scarred jawline, and a bespoke camel overcoat dusted with snow. He held a massive Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum, the barrel smoking in the dim light. He smiled, revealing gold-capped molars. "There she is," Moretti purred, stepping over the ruined doorframe. "The girl who slapped Roman Gallagher and lived. I have to admit I admire your spirit, but you cost me millions of dollars, kid. And for that, you and your little sister get to die." He raised his revolver, aiming it directly at Chloe's chest. Every instinct in Chloe's body screamed at her to drop the gun, to beg for mercy, to bargain. But as she looked down the barrel of the weapon, she didn't see just a mobster. She saw the embodiment of every powerful man who had ever tried to crush her. She saw the loan sharks, the corrupt diner managers, the debt collectors. And she remembered Roman's words. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met." Chloe didn't flinch. She squeezed the trigger. Bang! The recoil of the Glock sent a violent shockwave up her arms. Her shot went slightly wide, but it grazed Moretti's shoulder, tearing through his expensive coat and drawing a sharp spray of blood. Moretti roared in pain and fury, stumbling backward against the doorframe. He leveled his revolver to fire back, his eyes burning with murderous intent. Before he could pull the trigger, a massive shadow erupted from the darkened hallway behind him. Roman Gallagher moved with the terrifying speed of a striking viper. He slammed into Moretti from behind his forearm, wrapping violently around the older man's throat in a blood choke. Moretti's gun discharged into the ceiling, raining plaster down on the carpet. The two Mafia bosses crashed to the floor in a brutal, chaotic tangle of limbs and sheer lethal desperation. Chloe watched in absolute horror as the men fought for dominance. Moretti was vicious, driving his elbow backward into Roman's ribs, trying to break the hold. He managed to free his right arm, driving a concealed tactical knife deep into Roman's thigh. Roman let out a guttural, terrifying roar, but he didn't let go. He leveraged his massive weight, twisting violently, and brutally snapped Moretti's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife. With a final brutal surge of pure adrenaline and rage, Roman grabbed Moretti by the collar, hauled him upward, and slammed the back of the older man's skull against the sharp marble edge of the suite's heavy vanity table. There was a sickening crack. Moretti went completely limp, sliding to the floor in a lifeless heap, a dark pool of blood rapidly expanding across the pristine white carpet. Roman collapsed onto his hands and knees, gasping for air, clutching his profusely bleeding thigh. He was covered in soot blood and sweat, his eyes wild and feral as he scanned the room. When his eyes finally locked onto Chloe, who was still standing defensively in front of Lily's bed with her gun raised, the predator melted away. He let out a ragged sigh of profound relief. Chloe dropped the gun. It clattered against the floorboards. She sprinted across the room, dropping to her knees, and threw her arms around Roman's neck, burying her face in his ruined, blood-soaked shirt. "You're alive," she sobbed hysterically, her fingers digging desperately into his broad shoulders. "You're alive." Roman wrapped his massive arms securely around her, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her scent like it was the only oxygen left on Earth. "I'm here," he rasped, pressing desperate heated kisses to her temple. "It's over, Chloe. He's dead. It's completely over." 6 months later, the spring sun shone warmly over the bustling, chaotic streets of the Chicago Loop. Miller's Corner Diner had undergone a massive multi-million-dollar renovation. The greasy floors and cracked vinyl booths were gone, replaced by imported Italian marble countertops, plush velvet seating, and state-of-the-art espresso machines. The sign outside now read, "The Obsidian Cafe." Chloe stood behind the pristine counter, wearing a beautifully tailored charcoal grey Alexander McQueen blazer over a silk blouse. She wasn't carrying trays anymore. She was meticulously reviewing the weekly financial ledgers for the entire Gallagher enterprise on a sleek iPad. With Moretti dead and the West Side Syndicate completely absorbed into Roman's empire, the power dynamic in Chicago had drastically shifted. Roman had violently cleansed his ranks, leaving only absolute loyalists. But more importantly, he had handed the entire logistical and financial arm of his empire over to the only person in the world he trusted entirely. The little waitress in the scuffed shoes had become the undisputed queen of the Chicago underworld. The heavy glass door chimed. The bustling cafe instantly went completely dead silent. Roman Gallagher walked in. He wore a flawless midnight blue bespoke suit, exuding an aura of immense, untouchable power. Declan fully healed, and looking more imposing than ever stood guard by the entrance. Roman ignored the terrified stares of the wealthy patrons. He walked directly to the counter, his icy blue eyes locking onto Chloe, completely softening, with an intense proprietary devotion that made her heart flutter. He leaned against the marble counter, a faint, devastating smirk playing on his lips. "What can I get you?" Chloe asked, raising an eyebrow perfectly mirroring his arrogant posture. "Black coffee?" Roman commanded softly, his gravelly voice sending a familiar, thrilling shiver down her spine. "And make sure it's not stale." Chloe smiled a brilliant, fearless expression. She leaned over the counter, her lips brushing against his, in a slow, possessive kiss that made the entire cafe collectively hold its breath. "That will be $3.24, Mr. Gallagher," Chloe whispered against his lips. "Pay up." Roman chuckled, pulling a crisp $100 bill from his silver money clip and dropping it on the marble. "Keep the change, boss." If you couldn't tear your eyes away from Chloe and Roman's intense, dangerous journey from a $3 diner slap to ruling the entire Chicago underworld, you are not alone. What was your favorite plot twist? Did you see the hospital tracker, betrayal coming? Drop a comment below and let us know which Mafia trope you want to see us tackle next. Don't forget to absolutely smash that like button, share this story with your fellow dark romance addicts, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding, original audio dramas. Stay safe out there and always tip your waitress.